Well, welcome back to the Windows 8.1 UX Design Jumpstart. I'm Chris Mayo. I'm a Senior UX Evangelist here at Microsoft.
I'm Martin Thierien. I'm a User Experience Evangelist with Microsoft in the Netherlands.
And in this session, we're going to talk about UI controls. And in the first session, we talked a lot about personality and principles and patterns that are built into Windows 8.1. And in this session, what we're going to be talking about is how to get that personality, those patterns and principles baked into your app. And probably the easiest way to start is just by leveraging the built-in UI controls. So out of the box, the platform reinforces or provides those principles, patterns, and personality via UI controls as an example. You can get all of those things like the touch support, the animation support, the use of typography and composition directly from the built-in controls. And it's a great place to start within your app. So if you understand these UI controls and the features they provide and what they do, you'll understand where you're going to be able to leverage those UI controls within your app, and where in some places you might want to create a custom experience and create something that's totally wild and different and unique for your app. And by understanding those controls, you'll know where you can get some stuff for free and where you can take that time that you save, that effort that you save to focus on the unique parts of your application, like with a custom control or something along those lines. So let's start off just with a demo, just to give you an idea of some of the built-in controls and how they provide these personality principles and patterns within the app. So let's start off by looking at just the Store app. And if you go into the Store app, and we'll just go right to the home page here, you're going to look, and this app, all these features that we're seeing, like being able to flip through all these different featured applications, just a flip view control. It's got the buttons up and down to flip through the stories if I'm using my mouse and keyboard. It also just supports me just flipping with my finger here to go through them. You can see this progress bar over on the left-hand side. Nice little animation there that you're seeing. So right off the bat, this is a pretty simple, straightforward control, but there's a lot of really cool things that are going on there. For one, the fact that it supports touch as well as keyboard and mouse right out of the box.
And pen.
And pen, right? And this nice little animation, rather than just flipping through the pictures, they kind of animate up and down according to my finger. So that support for the animation is something that's just built into the control that I get for free, right? You can see I have a couple of hyperlink controls here. Here I've got a control that's providing this actual entire page as the hub control that's used to provide hubs. There's a section here, Picks for You, that little chevron there tells me that there's more items there. There's navigation elements hooked up behind it so I can navigate just to that page. Here then you see I've got what's called a grid view control that's taking this item template that I'm binding to data and repeating those items and automatically providing the panning so I can pan through these different pages, right? And if I go into an individual page, you can see again I've got a button control for installing the app. I've got a lot of text box controls to show me details about the app, like a description and features. Here, another flip view so I can look at the different just screenshots of the application, a rating control, a text control, this graphing control, and again, an item list or a repeater control that I can use to get through and see all the different reviews of the app. Even this search box is a built-in control. So features and abilities like that, animating the list down and showing, different results suggestions as well as different query suggestions and stuff like that is built in. Leveraging this particular control gives me that search capability that's going to be consistent across all the pages in my app and then consistent across applications so users will always know how it works. And then things like the nav bar up top, the ability to provide a quick and power user kind of navigation to go back to different areas within the application. These are all built-in UI controls, right? And so a lot of these patterns that we were seeing in that first session, that overview session, like this is a grid view, right? And if I wanted to work individually with one of these stories, if I just want to navigate to it, I can tap on it. But if I wanted to work with it, right, I can select it, and this selection here, whether it's single select or multi-select, is just built into the grid view control. It's a property that I turn on. linking that to an app bar control, this bar down at the bottom with these transient UI here, is just automatically built into the control. And you can see that I've styled these controls and customized them to meet my scenarios and features like we talked about, less is more. But that animation and those abilities, these are things that are just built into the controls and I can just leverage within my app. So knowing what those UI controls are and the features they provide and their capabilities, whether it's implementing, different common patterns or even elements of personality for a Windows app is really, really important because it gives me an idea of kind of what I get from the platform for free and then where I might want to focus my energies on creating something unique and compelling and different for my application. So here's a great example. If you look at the alarm control, they've got this custom control in here called the dial control.
You have to set the timer first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
It's
was
a
treating it
timer.
like a stopwatch.
No, that's a stopwatch.
Exactly, exactly. So here's this cool dial control that you can see here, and it's something that the Alarms app team did to really communicate time, not only in the way that I read time, but the way that I set the value of time, right? And you can see it's consistently used across all the different features within the Alarm app, right? And this is a unique control, and this is something that they did built off of the slider control. And the rest of all of the features within this app are using the inbox controls. In some cases, maybe some styling, like these are just 2 radio buttons that they changed to, rather than having the radio button fill in, changing the color of the selected item to match the color scheme of the app. But here are just some checkboxes. Here's a list control that's made up of buttons and then text. App bar buttons, or just buttons here styled with app bar glyphs here in order to save this and work with the alarms. But this is just a great example that I like to call out, and the fact that these a lot of these controls that you're going to see in this app are just out of the box controls that the team just used just straight out of the box and maybe did some styling. Others of the controls are things that they maybe did some custom tuning of the XAML to get something that was unique. And then in some cases, they created something completely different and completely new, still based off the platform, so they got a lot of features for free, but something that created an element of personality for this app that's just totally unique. This radial control is something that you don't see anywhere else in other apps, and it's something that's just really, really delightful. Just the turning on and off and the elements of color and animation, the fact that I can use, I can use touch if I'm on a touch device or keyboard or mouse. I mean, just really just a fantastic example there.
In the last session of tomorrow, we'll see more details with
Yeah.
experiences from that team and what it took to build a control like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was just something that the team kind of looked at what the Alarm app was going to be great at,
Yeah.
and they looked at the scenarios and they looked at the features, and knowing the platform and knowing these built-in controls, they could say, okay, well this is going to be a checkbox, and you check it, and that means the alarm goes off on Sunday or it doesn't, right? Versus they wanted to really change the style of how some of these controls were working, so they spent a little time just styling it to creating custom experiences. And the great thing about the platform is, since the principles, the patterns, and the personality are built into these controls, like touch support, really complex, but it's built in the control. I just get it for free. That gives me the ability to concentrate on the things that are going to be unique about my app. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this session. Okay. So the first thing we want to talk about is commanding surfaces, and specifically, what are the different places I can place controls within a Windows 8.1 app, right? Because it's not just on the page. There's different areas that I can place commands in order to support my scenarios. So commanding surfaces can span from just the page, so the surface that everybody sees as soon as they open my app, to various transient UI elements like app bars and flyouts and context menus, message boxes, or even moving some features to the charm. So users always know where to find them and they don't have to look for them, but they also don't have to see them all the time. If they need settings, they know exactly how to get to the settings charm, right?
Right.
So let's go into each of these in a little bit more detail. So the pages of your apps are going to be where you place core scenario UI. And this is just very direct and discoverable, and it's very simple. But there's a balance to be struck there, right? In the fact that you want your UI to be simple and easy to use and easy to discover. So really you focus on putting just the core scenarios onto the page, right? And that way users find exactly what your app's all about and how to use your app. Just from opening the app and just looking at the screen, right?
And again, here is the great add statement and the core scenarios and features that you came up with in what we talked about in the previous session. They're very handy also for this kind of design, what you put on the screen or what may be in the app bars or in other places.
Exactly, because if you leverage on-screen controls and things like direct manipulation, so rather than having a ton of buttons for modifying where this particular item lays in the list, just let people just use direct manipulation. If they want to move it, let them grab it, pull it, and move it someplace else. The UI becomes very simple and direct, and the clutter is removed. So you can see exactly what all those core features are directly on the page, and you can use the transient UI for non-core scenarios. So they're there and available in a way that, since it's a pattern, people know about it, they expect it, but they don't have to stare at that button, for changing between Celsius and Fahrenheit in the weather app, only when they need it, right? So that's where app bars come in. So the top app bar is generally reserved for navigation, and we've seen that in a bunch of different apps. We'll see it here in a demo. The bottom app bar is generally reserved for commanding. And this is generally reserved, right? It's all about your design, your scenarios. But if you follow this simple pattern, users will know where they can find that top app bar, or they can find power navigation or quick navigation, global navigation of the app, as well as they can find where the commands are. And if you look at this graphic here, you can see down at the bottom those little ellipses give you a hint that there's an app bar at the bottom. So this is new in Windows 8.1, gives users a hint that, hey, if they're looking for more commands, they can go ahead and drag their thumb up from the bottom or right-click on the screen or do Windows Z to actually show those app bars. And they're dismissed automatically, again, built into the app bar control just by light dismiss, so tapping anywhere else on the screen is going to dismiss that app bar. Again, a common pattern that people are going to expect. And it's really great that for non-core scenarios, I can have this on-demand UI just available to me whenever I want it. Users expect it. They're going to know where to look for those extra commands. Even just as simple as like cross-selecting something and getting the commands associated with what I can do to manipulate that item is just super powerful.
Yep.
So another UI surface is the flyout, and you'll see these throughout applications, whether it's like the settings flyout, or a flyout associated with communicating something to me as a user, like a warning or a confirmation or something along those lines. But these flyouts, they're just control surfaces. They can contain any UI control that we're going to talk about today. They are displayed on demand just via code within your application. They can be dismissed by light dismiss, so just tapping anywhere outside of that flyout, or by interacting with one of the commands on the flyout, like this, delete photos button would dismiss it, and it would delete the photos that you'd selected. Context menus, again, built into the system, but if you wanted to provide cut, copy, paste, that's just a built-in context menu that's behind selecting text. You can also build your own and provide your own commands here. But context menus are text commands, and you can have up to 5 commands on the menu and have those invoke code or features of your applications. And again, invoking them could be tapping and holding on something, tapping and holding on text or on this hyperlink here, and getting rid of them is just either selecting a command or just doing a light dismiss, so just touching anywhere else on the screen. Now, message dialogues are a specific control that requires explicit user interaction. So if you wanted to communicate some urgent information or errors, or ask the user a question that really you had to block progress within the application, you would use a message dialogue, like, would you like to report this problem? Either report the problem or no thanks, right? It dims the window behind. Again, that's a common pattern to show users that the foreground of the thing that is not dimmed requires their attention. And again, it's just a way to take some of that non-core UI and move it off the screen, so they don't have to look at those. They don't have to look at that message or that urgent information all the time, only in context. Okay. And then lastly is charms, right? So search, share, devices, settings, all the things that you see over here on the screen, when you swipe from the edge or move your mouse to the lower right-hand corner. Those are expected user actions. People know how to get through them just in the first few minutes of using Windows, right? And so users, you don't have to provide a settings button on every single page taking up pixels. Users will know that if they want to manipulate the settings of the app, they're just going to swipe from the side, touch the settings charm, it's going to show your settings UI and the entries into configuring your application, right? So it's a great way, again, to move the clutter off the screen. On page is all about core scenarios, discoverability, and clarity. These transient UI elements are ways to provide other features that maybe aren't used as commonly, but making them still very, very easy to use. You're just giving users one place to look, like in an app bar or in a charm, to find those scenarios easily.
And I noticed of the charm bar in Windows 8.1, when you use your mouse and go to the bottom right to get it, then the controls are at the lower part of the charms bar, and otherwise in the top when you go to the top. So it also helps users to get to their task very fast and easy. So there's also things of controls being very tailored to the easy use for the user.
Right, exactly. So let's talk about some of these UI controls. And in specific, let's kind of dive into some of the UI controls and their capabilities and stuff like that. Again, so you can get an idea of what you get out of the box versus what you might be creating as a custom experience within your app. So these UI controls implement the Windows personality and patterns right out of the box. And some of this, might be a little bit subtle if you're new to Windows. But if you think about like that capability for touch, keyboard, mouse, and pen, like the button control and the slider control and the app bar control, they all work regardless of whether you're on a machine like this where I have a mouse and keyboard, or you're just on a touch device, or you've got a device that also supports a pen. It works equally well across all of those. And that's a lot of work that the platform team baked into those controls. And you just get it for free just by using these built-in controls. Things like animation, like when you populate a grid view control and the way that it animates from top to bottom and left to right, communicates something to the user and adds a little bit of life and motion to the app. You get that for free just by using the built-in apps.
Yeah, and even so, the handling for developers is very easy because, as I said before, it's the same way you bind data to it or get the event that it was tapped with a finger, with a mouse, or whatever. And also the animations are all part of the platform, so it's very easy to use that and to have a very rich and compelling experience for the user.
Right, and even some things that are not so subtle, but even complex features like accessibility, globalization, and localization. They're built into the control, so you can just leverage the control and leverage those underlying engines and get these really sophisticated features just out of the box.
Exactly.
Right, and you can style them to reflect your branding, reflect the personality of your app. They're native to HTML and XAML. So, for example, if you look at some of the basic controls and how they're created within markup, you can see how easy they are to create, whether you're a XAML developer or an HTML or web developer. So, for example, if you look at all of the basic controls, and these are things that you would kind of expect for the platform to have, like buttons, whether those are just plain everyday buttons or like the back button, combo boxes, list boxes, the rating control, the slider control, time picker, toggle switch. All of these things are just the kind of common everyday widgets that you would expect to be provided within your applications. Right? And then if you look at how you create them, it's very, very native to each individual programming language or markup language. Like in HTML, creating a toggle switch is just a matter of creating a div tag and giving it the attribute data win control and setting it to winjs.ui.toggle. And you can see that generates, at rendering, it generates this nice toggle control with the animation and with the touch support, the mouse keyboard support, and all that, just by creating a div tag, right? So as you as a developer having that div tag generate the control via the WinJS libraries and being able to hook up some code behind it, like an event lister on the change to run some JavaScript code behind. It just feels very, very natural to me as a web developer.
And also styling it with just normal CSS styling. That's very powerful to just style controls that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just something that feels very native to me, right? And same thing for XAML, right? If I'm a XAML developer, I just instantiate a toggle switch just via the toggle switch tag. Give it a header, give it a name, and then I can hook up some C# or C++ or VB code behind it, like on the toggle event, and run my code behind that. And again, I get this nice control with all the principles and patterns and personality built into it, just right out of the box. Okay. Next, let's look at some of the text input controls, because again, this is something that maybe people might take for granted, but when you look at some of the things that are built into these controls, there's some really, really powerful features. So a single line text box having that consistent clear button, so users can always know that as they're typing something, if they just want to start over, they can just touch or mouse to clear that and clear out all the text in it. The email input control, providing the automatic validation for an email. The password box, showing the icons for each of the characters, and then having that reveal button if you wanted to see it, and then removing the reveal button as soon as you tab away from it. All those things are just built into these controls.
And also like validation that you see at the bottom left.
Yeah.
And just have validation there with your field, what's wrong with it, and how to address that error. That's very useful for the user because it's very easy to complete the task just by having that built within the control.
Right, and that's just a matter of styling and providing some validation details. Like this email control does it for email, but you can hook into that as well.
Yeah.
Right. The text editing controls, they're even more sophisticated. So doing things like if I had an email text box, I can provide a hint to Windows to say, hey, this is for email, and it'll show a specific keyboard, right, with the @ symbol and .com next to the space bar there. Just like if I was doing a telephone number, right, it provides a catered keyboard just for entering numbers, right? So it goes straight to the digits and lets me enter the digits there. I mean, these are hints you can provide to the platform, and again, it provides that feature. Doing so just makes that kind of fast and fluid experience. It makes it easy for me to type in an email or type in a phone number or account number or something like that. Okay, and then text editing, selection with a mouse and keyboard is just what you would expect. Like insert the caret and drag across. For touch, I can just touch the word. I get these nice two little handles, right? And if I press and hold, it'll give me a context menu. I can select more text by just moving those handles back and forth, right? Cut, copy, paste, and spell checking are just built into the platform, right? So like the spell checking for the word attendees, that's not something I had to do in my app. I just used the built-in text box control, and it's using the spell checker from Windows, right? Yeah. So a lot of stuff you get for free.
And the language that you selected in the UI.
Yep. Yeah, for that globalization support, right? The next set of controls beyond those just basic widgets are what I would call scenario controls that enable a little bit more of a deeper scenario as far as the Windows personality is concerned. So, for example, app bars. If you look at an app bar and all the different features that it has, the buttons, the toggle, the showing on context, whether it's selection or swipe from the bottom, light dismiss and all that, there's a lot of stuff that's going on there. And I can have in Windows 8.1, toolbars that are just app bar buttons, or I could have a full UI surface like you see here at the bottom from IE 11, where I've got little thumbnail controls and then a bunch of different buttons and a text box and so on. All of these features are built into the app bar control. So things as common as you can see this first app bar here, I have text at the bottom to show me what each app bar button does, and if I minimize the screen, it's going to automatically drop those. Right, to make it easier to see on a smaller screen or a smaller window. Just a lot of great features that are built into this app bar. And it's funny that most times when I start talking to people about Windows and they start asking me questions about how they would go about building the app bar, it's like, no, you don't build the app bar, right? You just customize it or style it or treat it like a UI surface. All of those features are just coming along for free for you, right? So there's a couple of different kinds of app bars. You can just use the standard one that has app bar buttons and separators and global as well as page-specific commands. Or you can do a custom app bar like the one down here at the bottom from IE 11, where you can use any controls and just use the guidelines for layout in order to create something that's specific and unique to your scenarios. Okay. And again, it's just native to the built-in supported languages. So here, to create an app bar in HTML, I just create a div tag and set that div tag to have that attribute data win control winjs.ui.appbar. right? And then I start putting app bar buttons within it and separators and telling it where I want to put those where I want to put those individual commands, right? And same thing for XAML. Like I create an app bar and I put a grid within there, and then I put app bar buttons within it. And you can see that this is the code that I use to create the app bar that you're seeing at the bottom of the screen, the one with the camera and add, remove, and then the separator and the delete button.
And you see that's also very easy to select an icon just by using icon is camera here.
Yeah.
So you don't have to remember all kind of the hex codes
Yeah,
or something
exactly.
like that. It's very readable
Right.
to implement this.
Yeah, even the ability of those icons from the Sego UI font and their ability to scale across different DPI and screen sizes, it's built in. You just leverage it.
Exactly.
Right? You can do custom glyphs and stuff like that. If that's personality of your app, or you're doing something unique, like the camera button, it'd be pretty simple. Everybody's going to know what that means. But if you had something completely unique and different one to supply your own, of course you can. You just kind of have to understand how it works, and we'll talk about scaling tomorrow. But that's just another example. So let's look at a couple of just examples for this within app bars and nav bars. So if I go to the weather app here, if I look at the weather for Redmond today, and it is still very, very cold. This is 25. Yeah, well, not in here. We've got lots of cameras and machines and stuff running, but outside it is very, very chilly. But you can see here, this is just a beautiful UI. I've got the picture of the background of the weather that currently matches the fact that it's cloudy today, and then I've got all these different items for the weather. I can pan through, but there's lots of different commands that I might have, for dealing with the weather. And if I want to access those, I can just swipe up from the bottom, right, and get the app bar, right, and I can change where my home is, or go to my current location, change from Celsius to Fahrenheit, refresh the page, and even this nav bar up here at the top. This is just a common pattern that people are going to expect, and it's implemented in the control, right? And it's great that I don't have to look at all these commands all the time, like seeing the weather, right? And scrolling through and seeing what the weather is going to be like during the course of the day. Those are core scenarios for a weather app. These other changes are things that would be great, to move off the screen and reduce the clutter of the UI. Right? And if you look at another example, if I go over to like the sound recorder, and we saw this earlier today, but I think it bears repeating. If I go to sound recorder, and you look at the app bar for this control, you can see it's a custom app bar, like with a couple of app bar buttons and this custom slider control and so on. Right? And I've got these trim control to trim down the sound bite and stuff. If I move this to the side and put it in a smaller window, the labels automatically drop and the spacing between the buttons automatically adjusts. That's just from the control. And then if I move it down to its minimum, you can see that I can adjust the layout to just support the core scenarios and remove the other buttons. So the app works great and looks great in this multitasking mode for my application. And again, just common patterns built into the control, making that really easy for me to do. Just the automatic dropping and trimming that space between buttons, and then that automatic layout support. Okay, but app bars can be really, really interesting and fun, right? Beyond just what you see through the stock app bar. Like if I look at this Fresh Paint app, this is an app all about painting and being artistic and so on. If I bring up the app bar for this, you can see here that it's branded and custom to the scenario of my app. It looks like an easel and a color palette here that I can use, and it even has some neat animations in here, right? So I can mix colors together, and I'm not very artistic, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But you can see it's beyond just that straight square app bar, and it's something that really reflects the personality of the app and what the app's all about, and a cool little animation there too. Okay. So that navigation bar control that you're seeing across all the different apps, that's just a control that we're shipping with Windows 8.1. And in general, app bars on the top are reserved for navigation. That just makes a consistent and predictable experience for our users. And it provides that direct navigation without browsing. So if I don't have to browse all the way to my favorite basketball team, I can just in the sports app just go to NBA and then go into my my individual favorite team, right? And that navbar control via properties is configurable to provide a lot of the features that you're going to want in your app bar, like pagination and panning and scrolling. And it can use either manual population with items or through data binding. So a lot of these features you're just getting for free from the control. Another great example is the hub control. So the hub page that you see, whether it's the store app or you're seeing in the sports app and so on, this is a new control with Windows 8.1. We had lots of people wanting to implement that hub experience that kind of draws me into the content and draws me into the scenarios of the app. So we wanted to make that a lot easier within Windows 8.1 to make that visually interesting, visually stunning start page to your app that kind of shows people what your app is about and draws them into your scenarios.
It would also have the different sections and
Yep.
different views on those sections.
Right.
And when you want to implement that in Windows 8, it was very hard to do
Yep.
because, well, you had to trim it down to just a grid
Right.
and just move things around. So this is far more easy to have
Yep.
those different sections in your page.
Exactly, exactly. And this just makes it really easy to discover what your app's all about and start leveraging your scenarios. Okay? So if you look at like the hub control, for example, in the travel application, right? If I launch travel, you can see that it's using the hub control here to define these different sections and put grid controls or maybe repeater controls within each section. These little section headings come from the control and make them navigable to list pages for the individual sections within the app. And just makes it really, really easy to develop that. And one of the cool things about it is it also supports this concept of semantic zoom. So if I want to go directly to a section like world travel, I can go there just really quickly, navigating just by pinching, right, and going to that individual section of the app. And again, that's just something that's a common pattern within Windows, and it's built into the control. Okay. And this hub control, if you look at it again, just feels very native to an HTML or to a XAML style developer. So I just create another div with a data win control set to winjs.ui.hub, and then I define the sections. Like this section 1 is just a static section, so it doesn't have the chevron, it's not navigable. But if for this other one, like section 3, I don't have that defined as being is header static equals to true, so it makes that header navigable, and you can see here I'm hooking up the code behind it using data win options. So on header invoked, select page control, and navigate to that individual page. And same thing for XAML, right? Is that I create a hub page and then define the different hub sections and style them and give them a structure, and then I get all those features of the hub control just for free. Okay. Searchbox is another great example of a control that provides that consistent UI or that search pattern across apps, so users are instantly familiar with the search feature or in-app search, but it also gives you the ability to customize it to meet your needs. So placeholder text, query suggestions, result suggestions, type to search, all these features that we're going to be talking about tomorrow in the search section are things that you can just configure, right, within the application and get that consistent search experience within your app. And again, that search box control is a key part of that we'll be talking about tomorrow. Data presentation controls, you see these throughout Windows applications, and talking about these, a lot of these patterns for data presentation are baked into the controls, and it's something that you can leverage and build on top of within your app. So the grid view control, so showing grids of items, whether those are horizontally panning or vertically panning. List view controls, which are reserved for being consistent lists of items right within a column. Flip view controls, so flipping through different content elements, whether it's images like we see here, or item containers that you would put other UI controls in. The item container and the repeater is a new control for Windows 8.1 that gives you this repeating item elements without all of the features that you would get in a grid view and a list view if that's overkill for the scenario. So the list view and grid view controls provide that data presentation panel that you're going to see in so many apps, whether that's in a grid or a list, and it provides a huge amount of features and functionality, not only as far as personality, but also from the perspective of platform. So data and UI virtualization is built into the control. The concept of grouping, as well as selection, these are things that you can just turn on or turn off within your app or within your grid view. Drag and drop, reordering, the animation that you see, not only when it animates items in, but when you're dragging and dropping things, cell spanning, all these are built into the controls, and you just you just tune it through setting properties on the control, and then style it to reflect your brand, and then you get all this stuff within your app.
Yeah, when you think of things like the virtualization, that's very important because it adds to the experience for the user, that it's still very fast, although there are maybe 10,000 of items in it, and you can just browse through it.
Right.
So those are very important things that you get for free from the platform.
Yeah, it's a really great story from the perspective that virtualization is something that if you've written that code, it's something that you want to design into your app to have kind of that really fast and responsive UI. Yeah. If you've written the code for that, it is really complex, and it's something that's built into the app that I can just, or built into the platform that I can just leverage.
Yeah.
So for data binding, it's a common pattern that you're going to see across all apps, where I would have that data source, whether it's JSON data that's being returned from a REST service, or I've got classes that were in memory for my app, and then I'm going to bind those to a template, like here a template that would have like a picture and a title and a subtitle. And once that's applied, the list view automatically renders that, and renders it as far as how many items it has, space to show, depending on the size of the screen, does the virtualization, automatically does the animation, and so on. So for a list view in HTML, I would create this first div tag at the top that would define the template of my items, like having a source and then having some text detail. And then when I created the div control for the winjs.ui.listViewControl itself, I would apply the template and then bind that to a data source. And then all those features, it's going to do all the rendering and the virtualization and the animation and stuff just for me. Right? And grid view data binding in XAML is pretty much the same kind of story. I'll create the tile template for the individual items and then style them via style tag. And then within the grid view class itself, I'll apply that template and I'll apply that styling, and it will render it based on the data that I bound to it. Okay? And you can use these controls to provide a lot of these common patterns that you're seeing throughout applications, like the content library pattern, just using that hub control populated with different list controls or flip view controls to give you access to a library of music or news stories or books and so on. And the things like the commanding selection and the drag and drop and the ability to reorder, those are just things that I turn on just by setting a property. Right? Master detail pattern, like you'd see in the mail application, where I've got that master list and then the detail. This is just a list box that I'm selecting items on and providing commands, and then binding to the right column to another control that has rendering the HTML for that particular email, right? And again, it supports the selection, the drag and drop, and the reordering that you'd expect from a list view control. It's just implemented with a few separate properties and in a different pattern. Here's another example, the picker pattern. So being able to pick items out of that list, like contacts. These are just an implementation of a list control and setting a few properties, right? Semantic zoom is another option that I can opt into within my app and automatically get that pinch down where I can set, make that 5 pages of navigation 1 page where it's easy to jump to different sections, and maybe even here in this example, add some different semantics to communicate something different about that data. Like here I've got mutual funds, where I'm showing a lot of detail. When I pinch down into the semantic zoom, I'm using color to show which mutual funds are up for today, which ones are down for today. And it's a common pattern that's built into the controls that you can leverage. That pinch gesture and zooming in, zooming out, that's all built in the control, and you can just use it to communicate something about the data.
Yeah, and then it's easier to implement things like data visualization that you see more and more. People think about different ways to really visualize large amounts of data.
Right.
So we can easily understand it and read what's happening there. Yeah. So it's also a very powerful control for that, to support that kind of scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. Very common pattern. Okay. So the flip view control that gives me the opportunity to flip through, a set of UI, whether that's, a image like I'm seeing here, or a bunch of different controls. And you can see here on the top, I've got those two flip items that I would get if I was using mouse and keyboard. If I'm not using touch, they disappear. Again, automatically support for touch as well as keyboard and mouse. I can opt into having this little hint down at the bottom to show me how many elements in there, and styling that to match the rest of the color and branding of my app, so users can flip through them and see that they're on number 2 of 5 elements and so on. The item container and the repeater control. These are new to Windows 8.1. If you don't need all the features of a list view control, if you're just showing, like here, for an hourly forecast, I'm going to have 24 hours I'm going to need to show. A grid view or a list view is kind of a overkill for that. So I can just define the individual items and place them, item containers, and place them within repeater control and get that repeating data-bound elements without having all of those extra features. Like if I'm not going to use the drag and drop, if I'm not going to use selection, if I'm not going to use virtualization, it's just much more lightweight. Okay? So for UI controls, the thing that we want to think about is understanding these controls, understanding their features and what they provide with regards to the principles, the patterns, and the personality of Windows Store apps. And figure out how much of the UI we can get for free out of the box, and then where we want to do something custom and differentiated for our app. So if I understand the commanding surfaces, where I would put core controls onto the page, right, make them very discoverable and honest, so my users know exactly how to turn on and off or add an alarm within the Alarms app, for example, while still providing all of the different non-core scenarios in a easy to find, easy to use way without having them clutter the UI surfaces. The commanding surfaces do that. So core scenarios go on the page. Less common scenarios would be maybe moved to an app bar or moved to the settings. And then understanding the UI controls and all the features they provide, like the animation, keyboard, mouse, and pen support, as well as touch, the ability to support accessibility as well as globalization and localization. All of these platform elements, or all of these personality elements, are built into the controls, built into the platform. So I can just implement the base personality from scratch, just right from the start, and I can build on top of that to make my app, my UI, unique, like they did with the Alarms app there. Either styling the controls or building brand new controls on top of an existing control like that dial control. Now the scenario controls that we talked about, like the app bar control and the nav bar control, enable some more complex, more sophisticated UI scenarios, right? And a lot of that stuff you get for free, like the light dismiss and the trimming of app bar buttons and stuff like that. That's just reflected in the control, and I just style that or configure it via a few properties when I instantiate the control, whether it's HTML or it's XAML. And then the data presentation controls for presenting as well as manipulating and working with data. That's just a matter of taking some data, implementing a template, merging those together at runtime, and then I get all the features of selection and drag and drop and reordering and stuff just from the control. And I can either get that via the list view and the grid view, which are very sophisticated, provide all that selection and virtualization of data and UI and so on. Or I just want something really simple, I can use the item container and the repeater control to provide just a lightweight presentation. Okay. So resources for these, what I did is I went through and provided a few jump-off points for not only designing, understanding the underlying design of these controls, like the hub control and designing navigation bars, designing app bars and so on, as well as like search box and the list view controls, but also linking to the dev center. So your developer team can get used to those controls, understand what features they provide out of the box. So you can say, okay, we need a feature that for this scenario and it's going to work like this, and you will automatically know, is that an out-of-the-box thing that I'm just going to get for free, or is that something that I'm going to need to do custom to kind of differentiate my app and make my app stand out?
Yeah. And the Dev Center shows a lot of like samples as well,
yeah,
where they're very focused on just one control or scenario to implement and how you can do that. So it's there's a lot of help there to get you started.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's the UI control session. Let's see here. It doesn't look like we have any buttons questions popping up. Well, I'm getting the thumbs up that one's coming. So are there any advantages to using XAML over HTML for design? There are. Well, I'll say this. Both of those markup languages and both of the underlying code behind, they're all going against the Windows platform and the Windows APIs. They're just realized in a way that's native to each of those platforms. There are subtle differences between XAML and HTML, but really for me, when I'm thinking about a project or getting started on a project, I really think about the background of the development team and the scenario around the app when I'm thinking about platform. If you're working with a team that it's a web development team, and they have lots of skills in HTML5 and CSS3 and JavaScript, it makes sense just to implement it, with HTML and use the web platform. If they're coming from a Silverlight or a WPF background, or maybe they're coming from other platforms that they're used to using, OO languages, C# and XAML is going to feel very, very native and very, very familiar to them. So there are differences. I mean, they're subtle and slight. I think the big difference really is kind of either the background of the team or the scenario of the app. Like I know that the Mail team did the Mail app in HTML just because Mail is HTML, right? Yeah. So they wanted to make that as native to the way that the HTML email is going to be rendered. So they did it in HTML, even though they were a bunch of C++ developers, right? Yeah. So great question, though. So the next question, what's the difference between items container and list view? Really, it's features. Items container and the repeater control is very, very lightweight, so it doesn't have as many features as the grid view control and the list view control. Probably the biggest one that I think about, they both support touch, they both have the animation. I think the really biggest difference between them is like the things like virtualization and the ability to do selection and drag and drop, right? So get familiar with both the controls, and then it'll be really easy for you to start talking in the language of controls. Like this is going to be a grid view control because we know we want people to be able to work with those items, like selecting them. Yeah. Versus this is just a list of repeating items. I mean, you're going to start talking in that language. You're going to understand the controls, and it's going to be really easy for you to see what control you're going to use. Okay. So the next question: how would you tell the nav bar to wrap rather than to pan? That's actually a setting on the control. You can tell it how to lay out the page itself. I'm sorry, to lay out the nav bar itself. The pagination and the panning are built in, so that's something you can customize and style within your app. But get familiar with the control, because like the pagination, the panning, the height and the width of it, it's all stuff that's either a built-in property or a style that you supply to it. Okay. So I think that's it for questions. So that's UI controls. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back, and we're talking about navigation.
Yep.
Perfect.
So see you soon.
Thanks.